Well, and good morning once again. And we're back vicariously in the Mood House. And yeah, Dick asked me a couple weeks ago if I had contacted the Mood House. I have not, guys. It's just been off my radar. I probably should be starting to think about that, but I have not. And so for at least the meantime, we're going to be meeting virtually like this. At least in the near future. So we've been looking at John's Gospel, as you are very aware. And last time we introduced this idea that is very clearly illustrated in chapter 5, 31 through 47, about this human propensity we have of binary thinking, whereas it's either in or out. And, binary thinking works very well with engineering and a lot that we tackle in life. But when it comes to human relationships, there are other factors involved. And as we come to the spiritual implications. And I think as we move into chapter 6, we're going to be seeing this kind of thing more in and out as a mere type of this binary thinking that we are, prone to as human beings. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's certainly part of who we are, and our abilities is given by God as human beings, but it's not the only thing. And so we're going to be looking at that. So in and out, this is a slide review from last time. We looked at our human tendency that what we do as human beings, we tend to define in as all which is in compliance to what I define as safe. We kind of circle the wagons, and everything within the wagon structure within the inside is safe. And then what is out is everything else, all that challenges my definition of being in. And, as I age, I'm just becoming more and more aware of this in me. And I'm sure we would all have lots of stories to talk about, but there we've got the in and the out, and we saw it illustrated in 5, 31 through 47. And this is what happens, is that everything on the out, everything out that lies outside the wagon safety zone is perceived as a threat. And because we are reacting to a threat, it creates fear-based action, which reinforces the separation. So instead of a coming together, what this does, it's common in all relationships, is just, it tends to separate us. And all we would have to do is look at Protestantism today, and we would have a good religious example of how that takes place. So that's what we looked at last week. That was the bulk of what we looked at. And then we went to a extended table time to discuss this about in regard to our own experience. And then we came back together and talked about it. So today we want to move into a new chapter, John chapter 6, verses 1 through 6. And could somebody read that? It's on the screen, or you can read it out of your Bible, either one. But let's read this together, and then we'll move into it.
After these things, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, or Tiberias. A large crowd followed him because they saw the signs which he was performing on those who were sick. Then Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was near. Therefore Jesus, lifting up his eyes and seeing that a large crowd was coming to him, said to Philip, Where are we to buy bread so that these may eat? This he was saying to test him, for he himself knew what he was intending to do.
Very good. Thanks, Dave. So let's move on. The setting, John 6, 1 through 4, the setting, what we're going to see is actually two miracles in chapter 6. And this is the beginning of the first. So after these things, when we read after these things, again, what we need to do is look, what are the things? And we tend to think in chronologic order that that the gospel writers are writing a chronology of an account of how things happen. That's not necessarily so. And what verifies that is there are 4 gospel accounts, and they are all beautifully weaved together by their writers under the inspiration of the Spirit of God to show us something. So in John's gospel, when we read after these things, it doesn't necessarily mean chronologically those things where they occurred in chapter 5, but I do believe, just given the flow in John's gospel, that I think what has happened prior should bear into what we're going to be looking about. So what we've seen in chapter 5 has bearing after these things. And what we saw at the latter part of chapter 5 is this, that the intensity of the negativism towards Jesus has come to a point in verse, I think it's verse 18, that says, and from this point, they decided that they planned together to kill him. And then he launched into that discourse, 19 through 47. And so I think that has bear into what we're going to be looking at. The intensity of the negativism and the rejection is going to continue, and of course we know that because we know the end of the story. So after these things, he arrives at the Sea of Galilee, it says, and then there's this little note mentioning the word Tiberias. Tiberias is a city on the western, I'm going to pull this up here so you can see this. Maybe. Can you guys see that get bigger?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got
Can you see, let's see here, if I got a stylus. Can you see Tiberias?
Yes.
On the west side, about halfway up. The
Right.
Galilee is 7 by 14 miles, 7 across and 14 long. So this gives you an idea. And what's interesting about the Sea of Galilee, its water levels is 530 feet below sea level, which is kind of interesting in itself. And it's in a bowl. And the shore really, it's more on the eastern side. It's more agricultural and flat. And as you get towards the north shore, the mountains of the northern mountains really become more pronounced, and it's relatively steep. Not steep in terms of the Rocky Mountains, but it's the setting of where this feeding of the 5,000 is going to take place. Well, where he comes is kind of up for grabs. The reason Tiberias is mentioned is because at this time, according to the first century church, the Sea of Galilee had another name, Sea of Tiberias. So it could be a general term, but there is allusion in the text as we move on that actually he could have be very near the city of Tiberias, which is relatively steep in there and would be a good setting. The actual location, here's another picture, Tabgha, Do you see Tabgha there? Tabgha.
Yeah.
That's the traditional setting of the Sermon on the, not the Sermon on the Mount, the feeding of the 5,000. And you can see if you go above there, do you see how the roads are weaving back and forth, representing switchbacks? Well, that shows you, it gives you some idea of the grade change going up. And so, we know this kind of took place in a hilly area. And so it's somewhere within this area where Jesus is. And the text is really unclear. Some of your interpretations, some of your translations have tried to bring a little more light to it, but it's a little unclear where this is actually taking place. But somewhere on the northwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee. So we know it's taking place here. A large crowd was following Jesus, and we know that to be true because he had performed many miracles of healing, and they were seeking him for that, following him because of that. And it was Passover. I don't think this was just an aside here. I think that it was Passover season, and therefore has a lot of bearing on what we're going to be reading and how to interpret this story. It was Passover. And because it was Passover, like during our holiday seasons, like Christmas or, well, Easter, which would be a closer counterpart, we're thinking resurrection. We're thinking resurrection of Christ. Dave, not to put you on the spot, but to put you on the spot, what would be the general feel in the land during Passover? What would be the big idea?
Well, I think there's an interesting parallel to today, because by this point in Jesus's time, the passion and time of Passover had become regimented for many of the Jews. The basic message was still there: the celebration of the release from the bondage of Egypt, the Passover, the angel of death, and all of the blessings, and a focus on the promise of a coming Messiah. Of course, as we know, as believers and with a perspective on the gospel now for 2,000 years back, at that time they were obviously missing the fact that this was the Messiah. But this was largely a historical remembrance for them, I believe, and that the true spiritual implication of it had been suppressed by the ritualistic aspect of what they were doing. And that's
Dave.
That's true today, I believe, as well. We let the ritual get in the way of the meaning.
Dave, thanks for your very thoughtful and articulate response. What I'm hearing you say is that the primary thought, the primary group think during this time of year in Israel would have been a celebration of the release from Egypt. And what was supposed to be there too was a second aspect of a looking forward to something. But because of the ritualism that was employed at the time, the groupthink was primarily focused in on the historical aspect of what happened in Egypt versus the promise of what was to happen, the promise coming one. Is that a close approximation of what you're expressing?
Well, that's a lot of my expression and interpretation. I'm sure there are many scholars who would take issue with some of that, but yeah, that's where I sit.
Okay, well, let's let's kind of go with that. And then you made the correlation twice that the same is happening today. And I could not believe, or I could not agree more of that same idea. So it's Passover. So let's keep what Dave said in mind. And then Jesus sits down. Now I put it here, hang on to your hats, folks, because in the Jewish culture, when the rabbi would teach, he would sit. And I think this is a trigger for the first century audience and for all of us today. What is Jesus going to do here? There's something, we have a setting that we've just looked at briefly, and now he sits. And what is going to happen? But before we look at that, what is going to happen, I want to review back and tie this into the wedding at Cana. The wedding at Cana, way back in week 66, was held in this same area. Jesus has returned to the Galilee area, and this story back in I don't have the exact text here. Let's see. Let me thumb through here. This is actually a slide from week 6. It is week 66 now. This is looking back to
chapter 2.
Yeah, and I had it on here. And from week 20. It's in red. No wonder I didn't see it. Review from week 20. So this slide is from week 20, and now we are in week 66. When I was saying that, I go, gee, well, if this was week 66, where in the heck are we now? But I didn't see that. The wedding takes place in Cana, which is to the west of the Sea of Galilee. But the whole idea is that he returns back to Galilee. And what's interesting about the language in this inaugural event, when Jesus speaks to his first event, is about turning water into wine. And we talked extensively about that. Later on in chapter 4, he talks about at the woman at the well, he takes water and he says, whoever drinks of this water will thirst again, but the water that I give you will spring up into everlasting life. Okay, so here we have two instances where he takes common elements and he's talking to the crowds. And he's talking to the crowds as an invitation into something larger, into something more fulfilling. And this is where I also think Passover fits in. Because the group thought at that time, here in chapter 6, during the time of the Passover, as Dave has stated, was primarily on a historical event about getting released from Egypt. But in the language of Jesus, at least on 2 occasions, and we're going to see the same occasion, we're going to see the same kind of talk here in chapter 6, when Jesus states that I am the bread of life. So in the wedding at Cana, you have the wine, which is interesting at the beginning. And now here we have the bread. And those are, of course, our 2 sacramental elements that we have, which I think is an interesting correlation. And tucked in the middle is water. And the language that Jesus is using, and I think throughout the gospel, is invitation into life. And that is a really hard thing for us human beings to get through our heads. And there is a release from. We've got that down. We know about Jesus dying for our sins, and we're in gratitude and thankfulness for that. But we're also being called into a promise of life, and that life is in the now. And I believe that that's framing my mind as we look at this chapter when Jesus talks about the bread of life. And he's going to say some really radical things about that. So here it comes, the teaching, that is, John 6, 5 and 6, and it says this, therefore, Jesus lifting up his eyes and seeing that a large crowd was coming to him, he said to Philip, Philip, where are we to buy bread that these may eat? This question. So what we know thus far, sickness has been healed. We know that from the text. People are seeking Jesus, who is the healer, and we know that. This is all good, and it's Passover. And then in that context, Jesus poses this question to Philip, and we know it to be, because it's stated, it's a test. It's a test.
Modern terminology is, where's the beef?
Yeah. Note that as we move into table time, there, and I want us to spend some time with this. There is more going on here than a chronological account of events. I've already stated that, and there is what happened here. There is also John's intent to take what happened and weave it into what he's attempting to communicate to his audience at the end of the first century and indirectly to us. And so I'd like for us now to think about the why underlying this question to Philip. We know it's a test, and what is he being tested for? Before responding, consider what the author has provided thus far to his readers. So let's break up into table time, and I'll give you guys about 10 minutes to discuss this, and then we'll come back together to process it together. So let's do that. And we will, let's see you in a bit.
That is you.
Somebody else.
Hi, fellas.
Yeah.
Oh, good. We got the teacher. So you're still recording, Mike. I didn't know if you wanted to or not.
Yeah, I'm going to shut it down per your recommendation. But I've got to find my little, oh, here it is.